Hi, this is Damien from AtHope, and I am an axiological atheist, which can be simply understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. And I'm here with a guest. Could you go ahead and tell us your name and what kind of atheist you are?
I'm Matt Dillahunty, and I may be different kinds of atheists depending on who I talk to. For me, it's pretty simple. If you believe or you are convinced there's a God, you are a theist, and everything else, you're not convinced, so you're an atheist. That doesn't necessarily mean you're convinced there are no gods, although generally speaking I am. But I think there's kind of a mistake in adopting a burden of proof unnecessarily. And at the end of the day, everything that I accept to be true is a tentative position that is subject to revision. I'm not claiming absolute certainty about anything. In fact, I argue that you can't have absolute certainty about anything. So my position is, I am unconvinced that there is a God. And in many cases, and possibly all cases I've been presented with, I am in fact convinced that those gods are not real because they set up a scenario in which, if that God were real, it would contradict something that we observe in reality, or something would make no sense. So maybe you've got a God out there somewhere who's hiding, but that God is indistinguishable from one that doesn't exist.
Right on. So when you were talking about your atheism and how we know things, so an axiological atheist, when I say value, we understand value in multiple layers. So in other words, a value judgment is a form of valuing. So to do a value judgment, you would need values to give it quality. So if you had, in other words, if I made you a skeptic and you didn't know the world at all, and I asked you to make a value judgment, you would have to say, I don't know, in a sense. But anyways, I don't want to get into that. I just want to real quick just make a point about that. So,
I follow that.
Yeah, so when I say value, okay, so axiology, when it comes to atheism, because axiologists is separate, and does not mean that axiology is atheism. It's that I'm an axiologist, but a theorist, and then I'm also an atheist. Now, there is a anthropocentric arguments for atheism. Axiological atheism is that. Or if an argument from evil is, in a sense, kind of like, if you look it up, is an axiological argument. Okay, so in a sense, it's a devaluing of the God concept from the beginning. So in a sense, it starts in apatheism. I don't know any theism thing, but I look at the real world. It doesn't seem to need a God, so thus I just assume there is no necessary to go after that subject. Then it takes the next position. It keeps going in layers of value. So the next position, if it's pushed more, is agnosticism. I don't know what you're talking about a God, but it doesn't stop there. Then it goes into atheism. Well, if you're going to make me discern a God, then I would say I don't believe you. I don't believe any of the claims. Then it moves into antitheism in a sense that the value has now been removed from the God concept. The God concept, thus, is a false thing being pushed, and actually is a claim in a sense that a being has a moral right over the human rights. And so to me, it makes me become, because of that, an anti-theist. Anyways, I can keep going on. All I'm just showing you, it's like layers of, you keep judging, but you're using value the whole time. Anyways, so
I think, granted, I'd have to kind of dig through detail, but there's two things that struck out at me. One, when you said it started with apatheism, which I don't know how you can start anything with the notion that you don't care.
Well, I see this notion that I don't have value in the God concept. I have no value in magic claims. Thus, because of that, I see no reason, no warrant, no justification to add care, because that would be a value violation. I'm adding value to a nothing, in a sense.
Well, I think that there's a problem there in that so whether or not somebody has presented an idea, a concept that is sufficiently coherent for you to evaluate is different from I have no reason to care. I mean, if somebody says, hey, let me tell you about Fergalburgle.
Right.
Okay. That's nonsensical, essentially, and so you're going to have to tell me what Fergalburgle is and how you know it, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that is on the same tier as the God claims, which is why I did a video about the problem of theological non-cognitivism, essentially saying that the idea is empty and void, because that's something that you would, I think, judge after the fact. So the reason I care about this subject at all is because I find myself in a world where not only am I a former believer, but there 70% or more of the population on the planet currently believes in some version of this. So there's a motivation to study to find out, okay, is anything that they're putting forth coherent? And if so, okay, it should be worth some study. And if not, why the hell do so many people believe this? And so that kind of drives at least my interest in the subject, is that I used to believe this and I don't. And I know some of the reasons why I don't, which makes it so frustrating when I can speak to other people who believe and give them essentially similar justifications to recognize the problem with their belief, and they don't give it up.
Right, and I understand that. Well, what I'm saying is, in other words, I'm not an apatheist. I don't own that term in a sense. I'm an axiological atheist. I'm not an apatheist. What I mean is that when you start, in other words, before you knew there wasn't a God or there was a God, you just lived your life. In a sense, you lived in a sense of apatheism. That even if you saw a picture of a God, you wouldn't inherently just start believing or questioning belief. Now, I agree with you that I'm saying the value changes the more that in the world that is an infringement in a sense of you. So if the God concept was the same as people choosing bubblegum, you'd be apatheist. You wouldn't have any value. The reason that you have a value to go against it, to understand it, is because it's presented in a way that provides, in a sense, a threat, because in our country, say America, that if you don't believe, you might not be able to have a job. You may have issues. Like me, I had issues at the hospital, with the doctor, because he was a theist and challenged me on being an atheist, and then all of a sudden didn't really want to totally work with me. So to me, there's consequences in a sense. So I definitely don't stay at apatheism. There's no way I can. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a demand.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that I don't know how you can start. It seems wrong to me to say I'm starting with apatheism or an apathetic position, because if you don't care, then there's no motivation. You have to move away from that. So
I understand.
But I think what you said, which I kind of maybe get now, is, and it's the same thing that I was kind of saying in a different way. I value it not because it holds some interest or value to me as stated. I value it because other people value it, and they value it sufficient so that it directs their decisions, which then have an effect on me and others.
Well, I totally agree. In fact, my schooling, I have a degree in psychology. And the only reason I ended up becoming an atheist so active is because they started telling me in my classes that religion was beneficial. And then I said, well, okay, how about the studies about atheism being beneficial? He said, well, they just have studies of being, negative. I'm like, but that's not reality. And there's like one of the teachers in the class, I have a video of it. The teacher in the class tells me, everyone is spiritual. And I said, okay, but if I'm a client and I'm an atheist, how does that help me? What you just said, this is the teacher telling me. And he goes, well, an atheist can be spiritual. And I go, but you're not listening to me. I don't know what the word spiritual means.
Exactly.
I mean, if you say it means feeling, then I have feelings. I don't need the word spiritual. If you say it has to do with like a love and care for the world, I call that humanity. I don't need the word spiritual. But so one of the other guys challenged, it was two people talking. One of the other guys challenged that speaker and said, you know what, Damien's right. And you're not listening.
Sam Harris and I, we've done a couple events. I'm getting ready to go to Phoenix this weekend, and I'll do a third event with him and Lawrence Krauss. And we, in the Chicago event afterwards at the bar, we had a long discussion about his use of the word spirituality, and he's a little irritated at his own use. It's just a matter of, I don't know what other word to put on what I'm describing, and in most contexts, what he's describing lines up partially with what people have frequently identified or labeled spirituality. And the point that I kept making, which I've made over and over on the show, is the term can mean so many different things to so many different people that renders it nearly useless. But it reminds me, Dan Dennett has this notion of the deeping, something that to the extent it's true, it's trivial, and to the extent that it is profound, it's false. And so that, I would love to say that spirituality is a deepening, except for the fact that it's still so ill-defined that I'm not quite sure I can fairly do that. But what I think we understand is that the term carries so much baggage tied to the supernatural, tied to people's notions about the divine,
Right.
of the transcendent. And there's no good evidence for any of that being true. So when you remove all those things from how spirituality has been used, you are left with the things that you describe. Oh, I have a feeling, or there's something ineffable and ephemeral that I cannot accurately describe, and so I'm just going to call it spirituality. It's now a placeholder word for God. Actually, I don't know what this is, but it's cool. And I'm not even convinced that it is a thing or that it's cool, which was what I was talking to Sam about, because he has in the past used the word, although he mentioned that he's using it less and less, and I think that's because of the baggage that comes along with it, and the fact that it's just fostering confusion.
Yeah.
In a way, if you have a term that is so ill-defined and so fungible in its usage, now just throw it out. If you want to talk about, the sort of Buddhist meditation that he's advocating for and losing this sense of self, I'd almost rather that we invent a new word and educate people what that word is, rather than trying to adopt this other word and say, oh, well, this is my version of spiritual. It reminds me of the people. There's the God of classical theism, the omni God. He's all-powerful, all benevolent, all-knowing, etc.
Logic contradiction.
Yeah, then there's all kinds of more specific and less specific gods. But then there are the people who are like, oh, well, this is what I mean by God. God is the universal mind and blah, blah, blah. It is rapidly getting to the point that God, as a label, is almost as useless as spiritual, except that we have a somewhat codified God of classical theism within theology and philosophy. So somebody took the time to define, this is what we're talking about for this God, and you are at a minimum going to branch off in different directions from that. We don't have that for spiritual.
Right.